Hi, friends. Welcome back to Strong as You Think, or if you're joining for the first time, welcome. So, this is a place where I like to discuss some really practical things that you can take home with you and in a relatively short time frame. So we like to it be really practical and really time sensitive. And I think you're going to really like what you hear. You can really use it. And so thank you for joining me. Today, I want to talk about how negative traits can be strengths. So a lot of times we want to we hear the negative traits and we think that's going to be the thing that helps us as we think about how bad we're doing. We don't want to do bad. We want to do good. And I've talked about this in a couple other episodes, about how that doesn't always work. But I think we still tend to do that. We still tend to go to that negative. But the reality is that we have every trait has a positive and a negative to it, or there's a continuum where it's good, but it can be bad. And in our church, we have some scriptures that also talk about this. One of them that's one of my favorite is it's in the Book of Mormon in Ether 12:27, and it says, part of it says, if they humble themselves before me and have faith in me, then I will make weak things become strong unto them. And I think for a long time, I always thought of that as if I am not patient, well, someday I'll be able to be really patient. And it's almost like that I could do the opposite. And I do think that's true, but I think in some ways we leave out some of the possibility in that scripture, how maybe some of our qualities that we might see, maybe that others might see as negative, actually have an element to them that could be positive or that we could turn positive. So, for example, we could be seen as determined or persevering, but that could also be seen as stubbornness. So we could say, oh, I'm stubborn, but there's also an element to stubbornness that could be determined or persevering. We could see ourselves as unassertive and passive, but that could also be that you're nice and kind. You could see yourself as overly sensitive, but that also means that you're probably empathetic. You might be insensitive or brutally honest, but that also means that maybe you're honest or genuine. You might see yourself as a doormat, maybe being walked on, but that also might mean that you're flexible. You're flexible with others. You could also see yourself as being overly perfectionistic, but that might mean that you really have an attention to detail. Or you could see the times when you accept bad behavior from others, but that also might mean that you're very loyal. So let's think about it. How do you describe your traits? How do you describe yourself? Is it always negative? Are you always seeing the negative parts of your traits? I want you to think about how could those traits be a positive? I would challenge you, when you see a trait, when you think something negative about yourself, why don't you think you can acknowledge that and the difficulties of maybe that negative, the truth of that. But I would challenge you to also look for the positive part of that trait. Like I said, if you're feeling bad that your feelings are getting hurt, think of how you're empathetic and how you can understand others. If you're thinking about how maybe overly passionate you are, like it's too much. Some people might say you're too much, but also think of how excited and motivating you can be to people. Like, I think on that continuum, there's a positive part to every trait we have. Every time we see it as negative, and think of how we can use that part of us for good, how that trait in us has a good part and how we can use that for good. And sometimes I think maybe that is actually a more doable part of how weak things become strong. We have this trait that we feel is a weakness, but there is a strength to that trait. There's a good part to that, having that trait in our lives. And so what I want to challenge you to do is to, every time, or at least one time at least this week, if not more, when you see something and see it as a negative trait and see how you're not good, I want you to look for the positive part of that trait and see how you can nurture that and bring that out more in your life, and how you don't have to completely change, but just moderate it a little bit. If we can moderate those wonderful things about ourselves, those things in our lives, we don't even have to completely change it. If we moderate it, we can turn what we see as a weakness, what maybe some others see as a weakness in us, into a strength. So that's what we're doing this week. For the next couple weeks, I want you to look honestly but kindly at yourself, where you see those negative things. And I want you to honestly see what part of that trait is positive. And then how can you nurture that and think about the positives and nurture and moderate that trait so that it becomes a positive and a strength in your life. All right. That's what I've got for today. Thank you for joining me. We'll see you next time. Bye.